I think the people that I get to work with day in, day out, the culture from the top down. We're a God-fearing, God-honoring company. He has blessed us, and to work in a place like that day in, day out is truly, I think, an exception in our country. That I wish we had more places like that.
Okay, let's call this meeting to order. Thank you. We'll turn it over to the city manager to go through the agenda.
I just want to remind everybody that we are volunteers.
That's right, we're just volunteers.
We're technically very low paid. Right.
No, I'm a volunteer.
You give me that malarkey. You're getting paid.
You're right, I'm getting paid.
You're getting paid.
Our reward is not good.
It'll be ahead.
It's like you wouldn't be here if you weren't getting paid.
Yeah.
Well, let's do item number one. If you'd like, approval of the minutes of last week's meeting.
Sorry.
All look
One
good.
looks good, two looks good.
Three.
All right, therefore,
Looks good.
we'll move now to item number two, second and final of ordinance 7399. This is the speed limit change on South Coulter.
It's good.
What's the hurricane center?
Item number three is also second and final, ordinance 7400. This is the rezoning up on Thompson, now the new United.
No questions.
Item number four, resolution calling a public hearing to determine whether they have a public nuisance. This one is not the day that we will review it and decide whether to condemn or to not condemn the property. This is setting the date in the future. And item number five and item number six, these actually are hearings on these two properties. There are sample photographs included in your packet.
Terrible.
We'll of course have more when we go into the session. We have put the scripts and that action page out of the resolution in each of your chairs out on the dais so that you won't have to flip back and forth between your documents.
So you got mine up there.
Yes, they're all out there. Everybody has the same sets, so stay right there together.
Two of them.
I've
Two of them.
got a quick question about four.
Okay.
It's two structures, but it's the same address, right?
It is.
Okay.
It is, and it's actually a pretty substantial structure. Scott, are you going to have photos of the one on North Lincoln? Or we just set?
No.
Okay.
No. Correct.
It's pretty
I
substantial.
have those photos.
It's a very substantial structure. Okay. So questions on 4, 5, or 6? Item number 7, appointments for boards and commissions. We have 3 up for you today. Amarillo Economic Development Corporation, both Mr. Bradley and Mr. Martin are finishing up their terms. I think we have the names of 2 gentlemen who have indicated that they would be willing and able to accept an appointment if you choose. Mr. Roy Barra and Mr. John Pritzer.
B-A-R-R-A. Otherwise, say Barra.
So spell it for him.
B-A-R-A. Barra.
Roll the R.
Barra.
That's
Oh, it's yours.
Sorry.
That's a single R, so it's not.
Not our
Okay. Barra.
I can't do that.
Barra is a R.
Yeah, don't roll it, or it's. Okay. Sorry.
Let's pass that around. That's number 4. By City County Public Health Board, Dr. Crossland is the City of Canyon's representative. The City of Canyon City Commission met and they have renominated Dr. Crossland to that board. It'll be subject to your confirmation today. The next one is the tax increment reinvestment zone number 1. This is Dr. Woodland. He is a board member for Amarillo College and the College Board of Regents last week or week before. I has nominated him for reappointment, subject to your confirmation. That's correct.
Regional bomb shot? You didn't
Since-
see it?
Since
Go
I
drive
have
by.
Since I work for Amarillo College and he's on my board, that's no problem, is it? I can still vote on this. Okay.
Somebody needs to salvage it, that does.
Oh, yeah, I love that.
Salvage the flagstone, it's all over the walls.
Drive by it before it comes back.
You won't believe
For your action.
Okay.
Take a look at it.
And,
Okay. I know it's beautiful. I mean,
Get
no,
closer.
not it, but the.
No,
flagstone.
I agree. It's pretty amazing. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Just right here.
Formerly the same owners of the King Apartments.
Oh, it looks like that, it does.
Maybe where all Flagstone went.
King Apartments, oh my gosh. The ones that were built on 10th Street.
It was Dollar General, because that was a great deal.
Fleabag.
Any questions on your boards and commissions? Yes,
Well,
and
they
his
already
board is
appointed.
already nominated.
We're
And
just-
if he doesn't win re-election, he knows that they'll just appoint somebody else. Yeah, I'm not saying that, I'm just saying that they've already.
It's subject to it.
It's all-
Subject to that, yeah.
Oh, look at yours.
Oh, we called.
Consent agenda. Consent item A is the interlocal agreement for water service. This is between the city of Amarillo and the city of Canyon. This actually dates back to the early 1980s. That contract is about to expire. This is a new contract. The total commitment of the 5 million gallons of water per day, that's the number that's been in there for these 30 years.
That's the cap.
That's the cap. I do not believe that they have ever taken 5 million a day throughout the life of this. Change this time is adding the ability for them to get up to 6.8 million per day during an emergency. And that is subject to Amarillo's approval and of course subject to be in a position to provide much more water to them. That is in there. I think back when these all were originally done, while everybody had contingency plans and so forth, they didn't have the formal drought contingency plans that we have today, so we have written that into this agreement that Canyon's bound to our plan. Don't see that being an issue. I think for most of the last summer, most of the last 2 summers, they operated it one step farther into their drought contingency plans than what we were on. So they do have local sources of supply, but they count on this from us as well.
I think it's neighborhood.
I do expect at least one, if not more, of Canyon's elected officials to be here during your 3 o'clock meetings. So if they are, we may want to recognize them.
Their economy is pretty closely tied to ours.
I actually got a call on the radio show last night about this. First one, he was waiting when we opened the show.
Questioning it?
No, he just said, why is it, what is it? I mean, everybody was pretty good. They had a bunch of calls last night. It was good. But that was the first one. He was fine, as we told him. It's a good thing for us and good for them. We're joined at the hip, I'd say.
Okay, item B, proposal for safety consulting services, award to DuPont. Amount of $136,369. This is what we discussed and briefly reviewed last week. Appreciate y'all's interest in your input. We look forward to getting that going.
It's gonna be interesting to see what they come back with.
It's kind of like we talked, and I think like Commissioner Reed's People recognize you've got to drill down to that cultural part of it. And then you've got to take what comes back and start acting on it. Reporting is huge. But those pieces are pretty well known. I mean, the mechanics of safety and safety systems are pretty well known. How do you get to that next step of making it the cultural goal to do that? Big step for us, and we're excited to do it. Item number C, award of the 2013 overlay project. LA Fuller and Sons. This is going to cover about 9 street miles with this. So this includes both the capital money and the portion of that penny tax rate increase from 2011 that goes into that. We maintain that funding going forward.
It looks like you had some part in there about, was I reading it wrong, about some curb and gutter where it needs it to? Or did I read that wrong? There was a map overlay and had some reference.
Maps, tab C. Concrete repair could be curb and gutter pan, could also be the valley gutters in between the streets and there.
Okay.
I haven't looked at it. Okay.
I like the spread of the projects across the whole city.
Sure is.
They were scattered out about like that last year. I think it was very successful.
Yeah, for a lot of reasons, traffic. How hard would it be to show in the last, this would be the third year where we, correct? Third year we quite a bit of that.
Let's see, the first increase would have been the 11-12 budget, so it was spring of 12. And then this will be the second.
Second,
13.
okay. That was good.
Yeah, be the third time you've approved it, but based on the,
Okay.
you don't do these till spring. Questions on the agenda? I think we're set up that if we can answer any questions and finish the agenda, we'll give Kelly pretty good time to take us through part number 3 of our development discussion.
The only other street I've had a question about, really a lot of question is, and I'm not sure it's a city, I'm having this little debate with the county judge, from trade winds to the railroads on 46th. If you drive it, you need to have your teeth checked before and after.
46 too.
46.
Going
From
west.
Trade winds going west to the railroad track.
I think that is,
He thinks it's ours.
no, I think to the tracks, the stuff on both sides of 46, the buildings on both sides are actually in the county. I can look and find
I
out.
looked because we, about 200 yards down that street going west from Trade winds is one of the cell phone signs. So I'm just wondering.
Well, hopefully we put the city limit line on the north right away.
Don't know.
We
I like
can
to
look
make it
that
sort
up.
of say hopefully.
Van, off the top of your head, do you know where the city limit line is up there?
That's what we were just discussing.
From Trade winds to the railroad tracks on
On
46.
46.
It'll
Out there
knock
by
your
Western
teeth
Sales.
loose going down the street.
Yeah, you know, remember that, we just had a specific use permit.
Yeah.
For
that trailer.
Yeah.
So maybe that's.
That was
But now-
on, that was inside the city limits on the west side, or east side of trade winds, it's out of the city limits. And so
This
straight out.
is, so you think this is in the city limits? Because this is west on 46 all the way. It's not
We'll-
south. That was
we'll go
south.
And what do you do about the line? Are the lines drawn on the roadway? Or are they?
Who pays
I
for
mean,
it?
chalk mark on the ground.
Yeah.
Just all of
Well,
Who pays
some
for
are
it?
at one of the other right-of-way lines, some are in the middle.
St. Mary's is on the north side.
I was
really
curious.
think it is on the north side. I know trade winds
That
proper.
makes more sense.
The airport proper is not in the city limits at all.
What's not in the
The
city?
airport itself.
Oh, yeah, no, it's not. That's where that, what's that? U is.
Yeah, don't cross it.
Well, he put it up and then he can cross it, but I can't.
Okay, let's move on.
You'd have that survey, be sure it's in the right
Probably.
spot.
Not this.
Probably.
Keep going,
you see such a discrepancy on the overlay bids, I mean, not discrepancy, but such a range of prices.
It's not been totally atypical on a lot of those types of projects.
Not been.
You obviously prefer if you can get them all plus or minus 5. Oh, yeah.
Has there been anything else?
If we were bidding cars,
yes.
we hated it because we would have had a real low bid.
So this is a new
Go back
part
and check
two.
our specs.
In new part two.
Yeah, we're gonna finish what we didn't hit last week, and I just added.
Can we throw away the old part two?
Part two, I mean,
I
part
just,
two.
I just printed off the rest of it that we didn't go over last.
Well, and so does this one, look at theirs.
Part B, part two, that's a lot of it.
Well, we have two different sections.
Well, you know, we had one last week,
Yeah.
call that A, the one handed out today, B.
Didn't you take it? Oh,
Pass
here.
me one of those back.
Excuse me.
Oh, did
We
we-
found it.
Did you take that? You
Yes,
take
I
that?
did. You weren't looking.
Hoarding, are you hoarding that?
You were looking at the bids, and
Documents?
so I
Okay,
thought.
let's go.
Let's get on down.
Ryan, I can see why
Well,
you're
the trouble over
trouble.
that corner of the table today.
There-
Can we use this?
What's the common denominator?
Everybody's giddy or something.
Youth,
Right.
and maturity.
Exactly.
Kelly, let's go ahead and begin, please.
Thank you.
Quickly.
Maybe you can recover. Not what you're talking
You're
about.
talking about development, so take off.
We, so far, we've really spent some time on talking about what a plat is, and then last week we started to kind of drill it down to show you, or to start talking about the process of platting and really what are some of the things that we look at as far as staff is concerned about plats, and some of the things we really have to pay attention to when somebody turns in a plat. And so today I wanted to continue to drill down and really get specific about the process, because the ultimate goal of this whole, these discussions is to bring to you a process that we think that we're recommending to staff that will address some of the issues that we're going to start to talk about more and more as we get into the actual process. So really, the subdivision planning process, I have some steps outlined right here that basically talks about the process that it goes through, but really the next slide is about it's a 3-week time frame, and it gives you a little bit better picture of what's involved in the process and how long it takes. You know, we talked about how by law we're allowed 30 days to approve a plat once it's submitted. And currently we have a 22-day process that we look at and use with our processes that we currently have in place. But basically we kind of work back. You know, the Planning and Zoning Commission meets on the second and fourth Mondays of every month. And so we work back from that and give ourselves 3 weeks basically to go through the process. So basically on a Monday that's 3 weeks from any Planning and Zoning Commission meeting date, we have a plat submittal deadline. So they have to have the plat submitted on that Monday by 5 o'clock in order to make that Planning and Zoning Commission meeting that's 3 weeks from that point. From that Monday, the very following Tuesday, sometimes Wednesdays, depending on how many we get, the planning department gets those entered in, we get sketches done, and we send those plats out to the various departments and utility companies to review and start making comments on. So basically, by the time we meet during the second week on a Wednesday, that's when we have our development review committee meeting. Staff and utility companies have basically had about 7 or 8 days to look at what's been submitted, get comments back on things that maybe haven't been provided, changes that we need, that kind of thing. So after that meeting, that's where everybody gets, and that meeting's where everybody gets around the same table. We go through the plats all together. We talk about things face to face, so if somebody wants to make a comment about something, everybody hears it, and if it impacts them in any way, they're there to hear that.
Including the person that submitted the plat.
They typically don't attend, but if there are big issues or something, we always might offer them the ability to be there to listen. And they can always attend if they want to. We don't exclude them if they don't want to, but typically they don't attend.
Do you just have a checklist? Surely you do. I mean, that you go down through to make sure that everything has been.
Right. Basically every department has their own checklist that they look at, and by the time that we meet, hopefully by the time we meet for that Wednesday meeting, everybody's already gone through that and at least has a pretty good idea of what's going to be needed to get the plat in order for it to be approved. So, but the main thing about that is, you know, we didn't even do that for a while. The plats were just distributed, everybody made comments, and they went back to the developer. So sometimes somebody might make a comment that might affect another department's comments, and so we finally, at least we've got everybody meeting in the same room at this point, so everybody hears what all the comments are.
Do they submit those back for review though? Following up on Jim's question, they make their comments in their department, submit it back for everybody to look at because it might interrelate with somebody else's department. Do they submit them back to y'all?
Right. Well, everybody hears what's said in that meeting, and then the planning department, we have a comment list that we compile, and we put everybody's comments on it, all on the same page.
So there's somebody taking notes in that.
Right. And so we get all those comments, we compile them. We then send that comment sheet to the engineers or surveyors or whoever's representing the property owner. And we get that to them, back to them on Friday of that second week. So then the engineers, surveyors, developers who they have working with them, they basically have that third week to get all the corrections done, do whatever, address any of the comments that staff may have, and they need to get those corrections back into us by that Friday of the third week for that Planning and Zoning Commission meeting on Monday. And that's usually a really busy day, both Friday and Monday, because they're trying to get things in, and staff, we do the best that we can to try to review everything to see that they've addressed everything that comments were made about.
You have to before you go to P&Z, don't you?
Well, that
Either
gap,
that or reject it.
Right.
that gap between Friday and Monday is pretty tough.
Yeah.
What if they bring it in on Wednesday? Do you hold it for the next Monday to start the clock?
If they bring it in, if they bring the plat in past Monday, or past the
They bring it in
submittal
Wednesday, Thursday, do you hold it till the next week to start the clock?
we hold it for the next submittal deadline.
So in other words, like once a month you have a submittal deadline. So
About every 3 weeks.
so every 3 weeks you have this development review committee.
They can turn in on any Monday they can get the clock started.
Mm-hmm.
The schedule's built around the P&Z meetings, which are the second and fourth Mondays.
Yeah, this is a process that overlaps.
That's what. So every Wednesday you have the development review committee?
About every other week.
Okay.
But your developers don't bring it in on Monday.
Right, we have on any given Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, 3 weeks prior to that, we have a submittal deadline.
Okay.
And they know it's Monday, and they know it's Friday. And we have a schedule that's printed out for the whole year, so we know what all the submittal deadlines are, and they all have those. But if they, most of the time, we get a call or somebody will come in and they'll say, well, what's the next deadline I can make? And well, because of property owner notices and those kinds of things, we have these deadlines, and if they can't meet that deadline, then they'll say, well, what's the next one I can make? And we'll have that one. We'll say, well, you can still make this one. So that's kind of how it works.
Now, Kelly, most of the time when these are submitted, these are pretty clean plats, aren't they? These are not real rough. I mean, they've been in contact with you on different issues many times before you ever get the submission.
Maybe, maybe not. And that kind of gets into where we're going to go here in just a minute. But a lot of times, you know, simple plat's a simple plat. And we remember we have different kinds of plats. We have minor plats that don't even have to be approved by the Planning and Zoning Commission. So if it's a real simple plat, not a lot involved with it, no dedication of right of way, no public improvements, it's usually pretty straightforward, and usually works pretty well. If it's anything other than that, you know, we have certain engineer groups or surveyors that pretty much do a good job at doing a little preliminary work and talking to the different departments and getting things kind of squared away. Sometimes others don't do as good a job, but sometimes they get busy and they don't have time to do that. So the answer to that is sometimes we do, sometimes we don't.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And you can tell the ones that really did do a lot of upfront due diligence on it. But bottom line, if we take it in Monday, you know, what we require is the plat and a filing fee, and that's what we require. If that's what they turn in, we accept it, and then we go through this 3-week process. And so again, staff has about 7 or 8 days to review it, make comments. We get those back to the developer. They have about a week to address it all, and it has to all be turned in by that Friday. You know, we used to let them turn it in up to noon on Monday, but that got to be such a problem with running around seeing who's approved what, and we said that if we don't get the corrections in by that Friday prior, then we'll have to either deny it or make changes. But even Friday is still a lot of running around. There's no time between, you know, that Friday and P&Z to give the staff. Staff had very little time to see if their comments have adequately been addressed.
You probably discussed this 2 weeks ago, and I apologize because I've forgotten. But it's traffic engineering in this process, so traffic flow will.
Yep. We send comments to every department, division, person that's involved or could be involved. Environmental health, you know, all of Excel, Atmos, all of those utility companies, engineering, public works, traffic engineering, utilities. So we send it out to everybody. You know, and it's more difficult than others. Some are more difficult than others. On a given plat to get all that done. Utility companies, sometimes we won't get any comments back from utility companies, and it's just it's kind of gotten to the point where if we don't get anything back, it's assumed they don't have any comments. But we really would prefer to get a comment sheet back that says no comment, so that if something comes up, say, well, you know.
And since you don't write their paycheck, I mean, what real incentive do they have to honor the product?
Yeah. And they're, you know, everybody's busy, and this is an extremely short timeline. 30 days is really tough anyway, and we don't even take the full 30 days. We do it in 22. We did it in 3 weeks, basically. So, but those are just some of the things that we work with, and if we think there's, you know, we do our best to try to catch things that if we didn't get a comment sheet from back from somebody, we think we feel more comfortable on this particular plat, we'll call them and say, we really would like to get something back to us.
This is also from 2 weeks ago, but 30 days is whose rule? Is it
States.
States, okay.
Remember, that's either act, whether it's approved or denied, act, or it's automatically approved.
Oh, it's automatic.
Right, if you don't act on it, then it's deemed automatically approved.
And acting can also be given an extension.
It's an approval or denial.
Oh, it's
You can
okay.
deny it and allow them to continue working forward and not have to restart. And that's the practice here.
And that's what we do, and that's where I was just heading with the plat. We generally can get the plat approved in a decent amount of time, but just to give you an example, last Monday was a Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, and we had 5 new plats submitted. All of them were denied because they weren't ready to be approved. So our process that we have here in Amarillo is that we'll deny them acting on it, and then we'll allow them to stay on the agenda as a carryover until that plat gets resolved. For whatever reason, it wasn't ready. A lot of times it's just because they didn't have time to get the corrections in, or they couldn't get them into us on time. Sometimes when we get plats in, the only plan that we may require and tie it to the plat approval is a drainage plan. And sometimes when we distribute the plats, the city engineer will look at the the plat, and he'll determine at that point that a drainage plan is required. Hopefully, they've done their homework up front, and they might know a drainage plan is required. So if they want that plat approved, they should know that they need to get that plan submitted to the city engineer and get it done, get it reviewed and have it approved before the plat gets approved.
Well, of course, one thing that jumps out at me, you have these state requirements that would be done within this limited amount of time. We took it upon ourselves to make it even more expeditious. But I think that the world should recognize the fact that this developer or owner, whatever you want to call the person that's on the other side that's submitting the plat for approval, he has one project he's working on. That's this, his deed. And it comes to us, and then we've got X numbers of departments that have to review this and make sure that it's compliant and that it fits and that it works and that it's everything's being planned for. And to me, that's a real onus on our part, on what we have to do in our time frame. And yet the complaints that we get are not from our staff, but from the outsiders, because things don't go expeditiously like they want them, or they prefer that they did.
Well, and I agree with everything you said, and I think there's a reason that I think will become kind of clear here in just a minute.
Okay,
That,
we keep trying to steal your thunder.
but
If the
you're right.
process is working, they'll get it figured out.
But yeah, and you're already starting to see what the problem is. But you're right in that we've tried to even compress this process into a 3-week instead of a 4-week process. And the only thing that we require at this point in time in this process is a plat and maybe a drainage plan. And so what you're hearing, and I think the end result of all of this is we're wanting to try to get things done because you guys are hearing we got to get things approved and we're not getting things approved. The plat process is a very expeditious process, but yet more times than not, I would say 80% of the time a plat's turned in, it is not approved in this 3-week process. It's always denied and it's carried over. And the reason is, just like I said, is something that we don't get the corrections back. Now, staff has made a real effort lately on really sticking to our review time frames and those kinds of things. So, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that there are times that we get everything reviewed in the amount of time available. But we've really been focusing on that lately, to make sure that we're trying to hold up our end of this really tough timeline. But that's the timeline that we got. But even still, by far the majority of plats, just like I told you, all of them that we just received had to be denied, and they're now carryovers. And so, what that is a process where we now have to check on those plats on a daily basis. The part that you don't see in that platting process is anything that had to do with public improvements. If it's a plat that requires any public improvements at all, then plans are needed before they can start construction of those public improvements. But we don't tie any of the design plans to plat approval. We don't require your plans to be submitted with the plat. Most cities do. In some form of the process, of the platting process, most cities require a preliminary plat. And what that is a plat, and they call it a preliminary plat, and then they also require the construction plans or design plans for any other public improvements that are required. That all has to be submitted up front. That all has to be approved, and in a lot of cities, even the public improvements have to be constructed and even accepted before you can even go to the final plat stage. Back here, this is a final plat. There's no preliminary plat or anything involved. It's just you turn in your plat, it gets approved, we go file it, you can start selling lots. And that's the way we do it here. In most cities, they don't do it this way. Number one, it's a real tough timeline. Number two, they require the paving plans, utility plans, and all those kinds of things up front so that they can review those with the plat to see if there are any issues that might come up.
It's a real chicken and egg-ish thing, isn't it? Because if the plan is there, and you're not gonna approve the plat until then, and then if either of those changes, then it changes the other.
It
Right.
can, it can.
And that may not be the correct phrase, the traditional model outside of Amarillo puts all of the expense, the time, and the effort up front and on the developer's side before the city issues that final, you're done. At that point, then the developer can sell his lots, can get the building permits, and can get going. We tried, and historically have tried in Amarillo to let a lot of this stuff run at the same time. We're a one and done deal on those plats, and they begin and end at the planning and zoning. They don't even come back up here. Then they've got to get into the plans, public right of way, the public streets, the alleys, water, wastewater, all of that stuff. But after they've platted out, we let them start selling those lots. So they're still working very mightily. They're still entertaining a lot of expense, but they're now starting to get the result of that, which is the revenue back off of those lots. If it all works as designed, you end up actually getting things done a little bit quicker and done without horribly front-loading those costs up into that development work.
And keeping the flow of cash and the entire process going. The developer gets to sell the lots, the builder gets to sell the lot, and you get this cash flow model going, which in talking to the development community, that's really important here. And that's what they're used to, and that's something that's very important to them. But the main thing I just wanted to let you know is the platting process is something that's really totally different and separate from the plan review and approval process. We don't require plans to be submitted with any and tied to any kind of plat approval.
And remember that for roughly 3 years, because of the economic downturn, there was no platting going on at all. You saw some amended plats where 3 lots combined to make 2 lots and have a bigger, property, because that piece of the market still worked. Now we've got such a huge opportunity for rapid growth, rapid residential development. There's a lot of this stuff that's beginning to happen all at once. I don't know if it's unprecedented. It certainly is for the last 10, 12 years for it to come together like this. It's a great opportunity, but it puts that much more burden on all of us, city side, developer side, contractor side, to get it done, get it going.
The developers, we heard rumblings about that, but the developers have all said to us, and it ended up, Lily and I have attended 2 events so far together, and I've gone to 3 with developers, and they've all said the city's response time is way down now. They know when they really talk about it for a while, they weren't developing plats for a while. They all feel like there's been a great response, and they are real pleased with the direction we're going. It doesn't mean we can't improve something. It's not on the same track it was a year ago at all.
And during this whole process, I've been talking with that community as well, and have heard positive things.
Me too.
But again, I just wanted to make sure that you understood that our plat approval process as it is now is not tied to the plan approval process. And even when you submit plans, even our current process now, if your utility plans, you turn those into utilities, and you can turn that in whenever you want. You can turn that into whichever individual they may have taken those plans. You could do your pavement plans to the engineering department whenever you want. So even that process has a tendency to it doesn't foster a real good environment for communication and collaboration, because engineering has no idea when something's been turned into utilities and vice versa. And then you have the engineer or surveyor, pretty much engineers, talking to an individual in utilities or an individual in engineering. And again, I'm not saying it always happens, but it can happen where something gets discussed and agreed upon without earshot, not within the earshot of the engineer that may need to hear that and determine something that they're working on. And so even the submittal, review, and approval process of those plans, isn't probably the best process there is for communication and that kind of thing. there's been instances where, you know, one entity will approve a set of plans, you know, but the other entity's not anywhere near approving their set of plans that they're looking at, you know, pavement or utilities, and so the developer gets, you know, well, I've got this approved, I've got to get this approved, and well, they kind of have to find out what's been discussed. But so anyway, it's just not a real conducive environment to, you know, cooperation, communication, collaboration, those kinds of things. Basically what you have here is, I think, some of the issues that we have in our current process for both plats and public improvements. Starting with the plats, we review them and we approve them, but we don't see the associated plans that are with that. That's, you know, that's the main reason other cities require both at the same time. And there are real issues that can come up later in reviewing the plans when the plat's already been approved. And I wanted to give you a real life example that just happened. Well, as a matter of fact, you know, the second reading of the zoning for the United parcel, that plat was submitted, and again, we don't require the plans, but that plat was submitted for review and approval, and we noticed by that plat that they were dedicating right-of-way, adjacent right-of-way to the north. That raises some flags, and so we want to know, well, if you're dedicating right-of-way, what are you planning to do? Luckily, in this instance, they had already submitted their construction plans down in building safety. So the engineer, city engineer, was able to go down there and look at the construction plans, and he saw, okay, well, they are dedicating right-of-way. And he could see some general things from the construction plans, but he needed, you know, detailed street plans because they're proposing to construct a street. They design it, and he asked for those type of details. Once he, in general, found out that that street was being designed to drain back onto United's property and be channeled back into a detention pond, he said, well, I need a drainage report. I need specific details on the streets because we may need a drainage easement. Well, all of that, requiring a drainage easement, the easement has to be on the plat. And so we were about ready to approve the plat when engineering says, wait a minute, we need a drainage easement. And at that point, United's at the point, I got to get this plat approved. And we're saying, well, we understand that, but we need a drainage easement, we think, because we still don't really know exactly what your plans are, but we think you're draining from your street to the site, to the retention pond. And so we're going to need an easement to allow us to drain off our public right-of-way onto your private detention pond. And so they said, okay, that's fine, we don't have a problem with it, just get it written up, get it to us, we'll sign it, let's just get everything approved. So once we get the easement written up, well, first of all, we decided not to hold the plat up, and we thought we could do the same thing with the drainage agreement. Go ahead and approve the plat so they didn't have to make any changes and have to go through all that. So we get the drainage agreement to them, and they find out, well, wait a minute, you're saying you're not only going to drain this portion, but anybody that develops north of it, you know, they're going to drain into the right-of-way, which will then drain into our retention pond, and we don't want that unless we say it's okay. So right there, we're just because we didn't have the ability to see plans with the plat, all of that, I'm just saying, that's how easy it can just unravel. And what could be a 3-4 week process now turns into a big, long, drawn-out process with, you know, people saying, well, you know, you're holding this plat up, and well, maybe we are, but the reason is we have some legitimate concerns because we didn't have the plans. So that's just a real...
And it's the city's fault that my grocery store is not being built.
It can get there pretty quick.
Or they got materials in the lot and they can't put them up there.
Right. And it really, you know, some of it isn't their fault. We don't require the plans. I mean, so they didn't have to turn them in. And then also they thought, okay, drainage agreement, that's fine. And all that sounds great. They were amenable to that and everything. But then when they found out we take anybody's drainage onto our public right-of-way, they didn't know that. And that created even more issues. That they may have to make a larger detention pond to handle all that.
I'm not sure I'm clear on triggering of drainage problems, it doesn't always come with the plat. You've got to see the plan. But there are times where you just know there's going to be a drainage problem. You see a plat just because of the geographic.
Well, the engineer, when, like I said, sometimes the engineer will require a drainage plan if he thinks it's needed.
When the plat comes in.
When the plat comes in.
But you're always going to review that pretty intensely when the plans come in, because you've covered it with asphalt or whatever reason.
Well, what triggered that is when we were looking at the street and we saw the street was designed to drain onto their property, not into a city facility. That's when we said, we need a detailed design of your street, and we need a detailed drainage report showing your calculations for not only this street, but, you know, calculate the flows for future development, because if you're taking this all to your detention pond, we need to know that that detention pond's gonna be adequate.
Well, and if that backs up to residential, you may have another developer has his property flooded where residential is now gonna be underwater.
In the nature of that water, we get it to the, you take your development and it tips this way into the street. The nature of that water changed. This was your water, now it's public water. Now we've got to go somewhere with it. I can't then put it to the next person's private property without a lawful instrument that allows us to do that. And by nature, and I think the mayor has that map.
This one that we're doing there, but it affects all of this. It actually, you're trying to figure out what's going to happen back here
Right.
too.
And where's the water to go?
Where are you going to go? And, you know, how are you going to get some, when we went out, I went out and looked at Perry Williams, that was the obvious part to the north. It goes all the way to, I mean, that 36-inch sewage line could really deal with people 2 miles north.
Good.
And you're trying to figure out all of that in this process when you don't know what's going to be out there.
Well,
Is there there's not a one-size-fits-all to any of this?
normally people drain into the city right-of-way, which is a whole other can of worms that we'll get into when we talk about standards, because then we've got to deal with it. But in
Well,
this
we have a drainage
particular,
utility now.
Exactly.
but this particular instance, they had everything designed going onto their own private property, and that's something really different for us, and we needed to make sure that if that's the way you want to design the street, then we need to make sure your drainage system's adequate. And if it's not, and you want to do it another way, then you need to do it another way. But this isn't a rare occasion. This happens quite frequently, and you can see how it can just kind of mushroom just with no real anger at anybody. It just kind of happens. And so requiring the plans with the plat helps all kinds of things. And when you're hearing things about how long it takes to get approvals, maybe requiring a little more upfront would help trim down that time on the back end trying to work all these problems out.
Could there be a variant, if you required that, could there be a time where you'd say, okay, we're going to allow you to do the plat, but understand, very limited, because you aren't ready with the plans, we're going to let you do the plat, but we're not real. Could you make exceptions, so you go back to the old system, but warn them ahead of time? You just cover.
Most of your larger developers and developments, they're gonna do the plat first, but while they're doing the plat, they're beginning that plan process. And remember back, I think it was 2 weeks ago, we don't have today a formal requirement in the process that Kelly, Van, and Emmett and his team see any of this in any preliminary form. It literally could be, here's your plat, and we're off to that 30-day period. And that is a little unusual. And I'm probably stealing the thunder on the later part of this. We need to come up, I feel like, with something that gives all of us that earlier, a little more comprehensive look. I don't think it has to be in tremendous detail, but just a better understanding of the big picture, the example that Kelly's, just relayed. Handling the drainage for that United, it's a large facility, it's gonna have a lot of impervious cover, sure, but that's not that difficult to figure out, and using an on-site system is fine. But when they then put the public road in, which is to support the out parcels and the other development, okay, that changed what was a reasonably simple equation. into something that was much more. And as we develop west, southwest, south, even to the southeast, because of the relatively flat topography, the drainage is truly a larger issue than what it might appear when you just drive by something.
Not, we need to require a plat and a Ouija board so they can.
Well, it just seems to me, just logically speaking, that you would want to have at least the big picture of what's gonna transpire, so that everyone can be in the same room talking about the same thing, so they can say, hey, I know about something's happening over here, we can't let that happen because of X, Y, Z. So I think we need to start looking at how we address this in a comprehensive manner, so that we don't have these problems, because as long as we don't fix this part of it, we're always gonna get complaints from developers and people who are building and so forth, because, you know, they think they're getting surprised. And then, you know, the time frame that we give them now for the platting, the 3-week period, I think is great, because the more time you give people, they're gonna push the envelope to the very limit. And so, I mean, you have to have deadlines, you have to have a stopping point or a pause point, so that people know that that's a trigger that sets something off, whether it's denial or, you know, another chance at the next meeting or whatever. So, I mean, to me, it just doesn't make any sense for us to not have some idea of what's gonna happen in a certain area of development.
That's what's led to Sonsi, and if you try to predict development in the streets, it's not the utilities underground, but the streets. Think about how, if we'd have thought of this 20, 30 years ago, and planned Sonsi differently, we would have had what now is gonna happen on the southeast part of it, where you have controlled access, divided highway, other things you wouldn't have, what we're gonna have forever with Sonsi. We're gonna fix some of it.
There are plenty of examples of that.
Yeah, there are. Well,
Well, it's a twofold goal. We've got to accommodate and get moving on your new growth, your new development. And we've got to do it in a manner that's affordable in the long term. And that was really kind of the purpose last week of showing you some of those platting examples where stuff didn't fit. Property that didn't have access.
Isn't one of the other issues, though, I mean, not everybody is Trammell Crow. And the more that you require up front, the more you really rather tend to kind of exclude the smaller operators. Is that not true?
No, not really. You may require, well, not necessarily. If you're gonna, it depends on what you're talking about. Smaller, I mean, is it just a 1-lot guy or is it a 7-lot guy? You know, if you're gonna be a developer and you're going to subdivide property into multiple lots and provide public improvements, you know, streets, alleys, water, sewer, then you need to kind of play with, you need to be a big boy. If you're going to have all those public improvements, then you're going to be required to design things and do things that are just needed to be done because of providing those benefits to the homeowner. So city staff's charge is making sure that you do everything right. And so it really, you know, really doesn't matter if it's a 200-lot deal or an 8-lot deal that still has a cul-de-sac and provides water, sewer, streets, and houses.
I suggest you're not changing the total cost or investment of a developer. Where some of that falls within the chaining of start to finish of the development could move, yes. It could push some more expense toward the ground. So it's important, I think, to balance that and accommodate it. But as far as are you making a development more expensive, these discussions, no. I mean, the same requirements are there, it's just when they stretch out on that timeline and come into play.
How much of this process has anything to do with developments where the infrastructure is already there? Like I'm thinking another Chance House when they did the veterans duplexes.
Very little.
That's most of that. It falls under the minor plat category, and you come in and you show your lot lines and what you're doing, and you're pretty much good to go.
It's a good point, because especially over there where they've done tremendous improvements, a lot of the issue there is zoning and land use. Remember, that's an industrial zone, not residential zone.
There are occasionally opportunities, like she's talking about, though, where you can correct old drainage issues.
Absolutely, and that's one of those three legs for the drainage utility, you know, O&M, fix existing problems and accommodate new.
There's also places where you're caught between both of those situations, like Sinclair was talking about.
Over on the.
Because there's no underground utilities, it was platted.
Well,
correct?
Right. Paul, thank you for bringing that up. And I should have thought of that and mentioned it to Kelly. Vicki, what was the name of that? Where Curtis Sinclair was working on, was that old Tierra or something?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right
Where
Eastern.
he was trying to develop houses.
Yeah.
Eastern and I-40, just south of the gas station and that truck place, there's a big open field.
Yeah.
Okay. That big open field was platted into a residential subdivision.
In the 50s.
Legitimately platted, legitimately approved, here's your stamp, file it of record, now go sell lots. And they did.
They went to the fairgrounds and sold them.
I don't know where they sold them, but they sold all those lots. Okay, does anybody notice that that neighborhood's not there?
I noticed that.
They put
There are
streets.
no utilities
Well,
there.
they plowed streets so it looked like something was coming.
But they never built them.
Right.
Now,
And they
legitimately
disappeared.
platted, legitimate sale of lots, but now 60-some odd years later, because it's been sold lot by lot by lot by lot, there's no longer a developer that's in a position to come in and make these public improvements.
There's 700.
Because you've got a homeowner, or not a homeowner, you've got a lot owner that owns a residential lot
Can't do it.
that cannot build a house on it.
And isn't it 60% that they have to have control of in order to change it?
Or get everybody to sign off, and they live, there's 3 generations now living off in 4 states away. Isn't it 700 potential lots?
There's
This is first
a
state.
huge, yeah, there's hundreds of lots, and there's probably, I think they've got about 30% of the lots under one ownership.
He's got
now.
more than that now.
Yeah, okay, well, I haven't talked to him in a while, but it's just the poster child nightmare of not requiring improvements before you.
But that's part of, the reason I brought that up is that's part of this infill discussion we're having, because we need mechanisms so they can recover the costs of those, and that's a different structure than we've had in the city before. So if they go in and put in those utilities, as they sell a lot, somebody can't glean that first investment and go ahead and take it.
And that's
The next person that doesn't give up their lot.
And that's a real challenge. I would suggest there's 2 types of infill development. There's building in those areas that already exist. They've got the streets and the utilities, and you're either taking something out, putting something new in, or you're going back and grabbing those lots that for whatever reason never were built upon. That's one. And I think there's good mechanisms to deal with that. Ones like this, I wouldn't say Sunrise, that's the one on the north side, but that one is a bigger challenge because you've got a gentleman that's accumulated a significant number of those lots. They're not all though, okay, here's one street's worth, I'm ready to go. They're scattered throughout the hundreds that are out in that neighborhood. It's not a good mechanism to where he's got the certainty, okay, I'll pay for those public improvements, I'll do the roads, the curbs, the gutters, the water, wastewater. And then as other people who didn't participate connect, they'll be able to pay him back, he'll be able to require that. It's a
Why
challenge.
is it didn't develop like the east side of Washington at about 30th Street, where those were, even up to 15, 20 years ago, those were dirt streets. And you had homes, and you had plumbing, you had dirt streets, and they just were paved like 15 years ago.
Paid through our community development
Right,
program.
why is it that subdivision didn't develop like that?
Because the guy disappeared with the money and got tracked down and I think prosecuted, didn't he, for some kind of fraud? He literally sold the lots at the fairgrounds and then disappeared to
I heard
Vegas.
they had a call-in radio show where you could call in and win a lot.
Okay.
Where you're talking about the developers did put in utilities, they existed.
They did put in utilities, they just didn't put in the street.
This was just a
And they
scam.
weren't required to up until
You did when it was stolen, probably.
the mid-50s. San Jacinto, Glenwood, parts of Sunrise, Upper Highland. That's where we ended up having to do most of our street paving with new development, is where they put the street in front of the house, but all the side streets were not paved.
That's not gonna happen again, but what I was trying to figure out is, can we enact some mechanism where they could develop it, and the guy could recover his fees? Instead of a lien.
The answer is we're trying,
Okay.
and we worked with Curtis quite a bit to try that. He just couldn't get enough density of what he owned to give him the certainty that he needed.
Sure.
The other option for a deal like that would be for the city to, in effect, step into those shoes. You pay for the streets, the curb, the gutter, water, etc. And then you assess, kind of like the way you used to get streets paved, where 50+1 came in and said, I want my street or my alley paved. We did it. We sent you bills. Most of you paid, some of you didn't, and we perfected a lien onto the property.
Do we have that opportunity now, or we have to do something to get that opportunity?
You have that opportunity. You're looking at a tremendous expense with a pretty low compliance
But
rate.
if you took a little section somewhere and looked at it, you know, and expanded, like if the person up by Pavlart ran out of money, where we did that deal in 05, and then they didn't do anything else, if you could do something there, I mean, I'm just wondering if we're looking at all the ways to do infill and fix it.
I think that's why we need to study
Yeah.
what we're gonna do in the future to address some of those issues.
And just being aware of and they are anomalies, but being aware of some of these anomalies that are out there, now that you've heard it, when you see it, you'll get the, okay, I see where that got disconnected.
We're never gonna get info unless we incentivize it some way, though, or make it
Exactly.
possible.
Well,
And I think on the small scale, there's probably been more than is generally known, but doing it in full blocks, not, and there's places we could. There's places we could.
there's some issues that I've listed out there. We've gone over some of them, but really I just wanted to point out the big three. That if you really boil it down, these are the big three issues with our current processes. Number one, we don't require plans for plat approval. It's just something that creates issues and can create problems later on down the line if something comes up. The plat's already been approved. What do you do to fix it? We have no deadlines for plats or plans. I know we do, for the plat, I just told you we have 30 days, and by the fact of us denying it and allowing it to be on the carryover list, it turns in, it effectively becomes no deadline because it just can roll over and roll over in perpetuity until things get settled. Plans, we may say in our ordinances that we have 10 days to review and get those comments to you. Then you get it back to us, then we have 5 days to get those comments back to you. There's still no deadline. That can go on forever. If an engineer on the private side gets busy, we may not get revisions back for months. So when you hear about all these problems, that things aren't getting approved and it's taking so long, having some deadlines and having some sort of a process to where things are tied together and where we do have some deadlines, and if those deadlines aren't met, then, plat doesn't get approved, and you have to start the process over, or something like that. That helps keep everybody accountable, but for right now, we literally have no deadlines, and that's why things continue to draw out, and you hear a lot about that. And some of that's on staff, and some of that's on the private side. It just goes back and forth. The current.
Let me interrupt. When everybody's busy and the volume of work right now that's pending in Amarillo is tremendous, it is a huge opportunity. When you start getting into something that you submit it, I review it, I comment. If you submit it, I have to review it. If it wasn't all there, I have to comment. You almost turn that into design by review, and that's never going to be prompt, and that's never going to be what we really want it to be.
Not efficient.
For either party, for both sides.
And I looked ahead, so I don't think I'm stealing any of your thunder on this, but to me, we've studied this issue at the suggestion of developers and even of yourself to try to streamline and make this a better process. But to me, it's too constrained time-wise, and the requirements within this process, especially at the front end, might need to be expanded.
You're exactly right, and that's exactly what I'm going to
If
be
you get everything
proposing.
you need.
So can you but you have a state deadline that's imposed?
On a
We
plat.
have to operate the
On
plat.
a plat, okay.
So really, taking those three large issues, you know, is there a solution? I think there is. We've met several times as staff. I've met several times with the developers. I've had one meeting, a group meeting with engineers and surveyors. And you know what? There are a few comments, but on the whole, especially from the developers, I think everybody is on board with doing something, and I think it's all pointing towards exactly what you're saying, is at some point you just gotta do a little bit more on the front end to alleviate some of the problems that come on the back end that can really just draw the whole process out.
And that you can feel relatively assured you're gonna get it done within this time frame,
Those
because
prices.
it's not so compressed.
Right.
That
And
Friday
so,
to Monday deal is, what's almost impossible.
Well, they've doubled that time because it used to be noon Monday for a 3 o'clock meeting,
No, that's-
which forced you to have to
that's
deny
different.
pushovers.
One other observation though, and that is that there's been some discussion about having a new person who really rather is there to coordinate all the different departments.